I tend to use gradients and glow effects as elements to blend layers together and better create one cohesive look while adding a sense of added depth and style to the project overall. Let's start by looking at our project. Go down to the timeline and select layer 4. Then go ahead and enable Solo for that layer. I want to draw your attention to the fact that this graphic is pre-rendered. All the color effects and graphics have already been done, and all we did was just add some text and some other elements over top to create this kind of infographic. Well, we're going to go ahead and pretend like we have a normal motion graphics project where the client wants to make a change now. And we don't necessarily want to go back and have to re-render that background graphic. So this is where we can use gradients and glows to kind of smooth things out. The client would like this text to be a little bit more legible, and they just want to add a little bit of a pop to it. Of course, one of those descriptive effects, pop. Whenever I hear that, I always think to myself, okay, well, maybe I could just add a little bit of glow, and hopefully that's what they're looking for. All right, so to get started with layer 4 selected, let's start by adding a new layer solid. I'll go up under Layer and choose New Solid. It doesn't matter what the color of your solid is. I'm going to leave mine dark gray, and I'll choose Make Comp Size. And let's name this. I'll name this Gradient. And click OK. So now I have a gradient layer, but there's no gradient applied. So we need to go up under Effect and actually generate a gradient. So go to Generate, and we'll choose Gradient Ramp. When we do that, the default settings create a black and white gradient from top to bottom. So if we look in our Effect Controls panel, let's change the start of the ramp. I'm just going to click this little target button, and that gives me these guides. And I want to start by positioning this guide in the middle of my comp vertically, but horizontally, I want to make sure that it is kind of in the middle of all of this text, and I'll just click. And it's hard to see, but there actually is another control handle here underneath my square control handle for the layer. And if you just click and drag, since we had just clicked on the start of ramp, After Effects is smart enough to know that we're trying to move the end of ramp color. So I'm going to position this a little close to my graphic, maybe around here. And just to make sure that this is perfectly vertical, if we go back to our effect controls, I can just type in a specific number for my end of ramp Y value. So I'll say 360. So that matches X and Y. Now let's go down to layer 4 and solo that layer. I don't know if you can see, but there tends to be some banding or stair stepping that's happening in the transition from the dark pixels to the light pixels. If this ever happens, you don't have to increase the color space of your composition. Within the gradient ramp itself, you can go to Ramp Scatter and just increase that number. And this generates a fair amount of noise throughout the gradient map. And notice that noise just kind of breaks up those lines and smooths out any possible banding that you have. If I needed to swap colors, I could just swap colors back and forth. But I like these general colors. What I want to do is darken the left side of the screen. So I'll do that using a blend mode. If we look in our timeline here, you notice I have both my switches and my modes open at the same time. If you look in the lower left corner of the timeline here, I could use this button to expand both switches and blend modes. I'll actually just turn that off here for a second, and I'll toggle my switches and modes. So I want to darken my background, and I want to see how this gradient looks over the footage. So let's disable Solo for layer 4, and then go to my blend modes, click on the word normal, and notice the second group down starts with the word darken. So I know all of these different blend modes in this group will darken what's going on. So if we choose multiply, it's just going to darken any of the dark pixels, and any of the white pixels, it's really not going to do anything. If we toggle the visibility of this layer off and on, you can see exactly what's happening. So we have two ways of better blending this. If I select layer 4 and then press T, I can open the opacity and just decrease this number, which kind of works. I'll decrease this down to around 40%. If I chose blend with original, as I increase this number, it's actually going to start blending back the original layer solid color, which I don't necessarily want to do. So I'll leave that set to 0. So here you can see I've definitely smoothed out this background graphic. And if I turn off and on the visibility, you can see it's definitely making the white pixels pop a little more, but Surf Zone's a little harder to read. So here I'll just decrease the opacity just a little bit more. And I want this dark area to go a little further. So let's click on our end of ramp and just drag it a little further out to the right there. And that'll just bring the dark pixels a little further across. So we have our gradient applied. Now let's add a pop. We'll do that using an adjustment layer. So with layer 4 selected, let's go up under layer and choose new adjustment layer. Notice in the timeline layer 4 is already selected, so we can just press return and rename that adjustment layer. I'll call this glow. And since it's an adjustment layer, we can position it in the layer hierarchy. I want the glow to not only affect the background video, but I also want to affect the text. So let's drag it above layer 3. And then to apply the glow, this is a stylized effect. I can go up under Effect and go down to Stylize, or I can just go over to my Effect and Presets panel here in the right side of the interface, and I can just click in the search field and type glow. Now I'll just drag and drop that effect directly onto my adjustment layer. Now we need to blend this back a little bit. We want the glow based on the color channels. If we applied this to a layer that had an alpha, we could change it to alpha, but since this is one big solid adjustment layer, I'll just leave it set to color channels. If we increase the glow threshold, it chooses less pixels or less bright pixels to apply this to. So now, the higher the threshold, it's really only applying it to the super bright pixels. So we'll increase the glow threshold, and I want to soften this glow a little bit here. So we'll increase the glow radius. There we go. And let's decrease the glow intensity. I'll just scrub it down to around 0.4. So here, if we toggle the visibility off and on of my effect, you can see I've just added a little pop, but it's not overwhelming to the graphic as a whole. So as you can see, when you combine gradients and adjustment layers with a glow effect, you can really stylize graphics. And if you've ever pre-rendered something, this eliminates the need to actually have to go back and change the original render. You can just move things around in your layer hierarchy and tweak how all the layers blend together to smooth things out.